Today, we're going to learn about sublimated quilt blocks. Hi everybody, it is April and I'm in my craft room. Now don't click away. Just because you don't know what sublimated quilt blocks are and it's something new, you might actually learn something. Stay around and I will show you what sublimation is. Sublimation is a form of printing. So you have sublimation ink. Now you can buy a printer that uses sublimation ink, or you can buy a printer and convert it to use sublimation ink. I've actually done both. It's a printer just like an everyday printer and it prints on sublimation paper. This print will be applied to a sublimation blank, if you will. Now the thing about sublimation is the best result is on, from fabric perspective, is on 100% polyester. So you're probably thinking, are we really going to make 100% polyester quilt? Well, we're going to use 100% polyester to make a quilt. If I use 50-50, like a 50% cotton, 50% polyester, you can do that, but your image will not be as vibrant and it will eventually wash out. And I'm going to show you an alternative in case you don't have a sublimation printer, you don't want to get a sublimation printer, and this just doesn't even interest you at all. It's going to be fun and I think you'll enjoy the outcome. So the first thing you want to do is print, and you're going to pick something to print, and this is how you do it. In order to select an image that I want to print for sublimation or any other project I might be working on, I use Creative Fabrica. And I do a search. So here I'm searching for watercolor flowers with splatter. And then it brings up what it thinks that would be most appropriate for my search. Now this particular one has all kinds of watercolor flowers. Let's see if I can see them individually. Ooh, those are pretty. Okay. So if I want to use these images, I have the kind of membership that just allows me to download. So I'm going to download that file. And then I'm going to bring up my Finder window. Now I'm working on a Macintosh, but whatever you have, this should work just fine. So now I need to go to my downloads. And here I have watercolor spring flowers background. So I'm going to double click it, and that's going to unzip the folder. Now I can get rid of the zipped file. So I'm going to go into the folder, and they don't really have great names. It's background 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So let's open the first one. And there it is. Oh, so pretty. I just love splatter. As I have a Sawgrass printer, I'm going to go in what is called PrintMate. And here I can add a file. So I can either drag a file or I can just find a file. I'm going to drag a file. Maybe. There we go. Now these images are oftentimes too big for my paper size. I only have the ability to do 8.5 by 11. So I click Fit to Paper Size. I am not really putting it on a t-shirt, but that looks to be the closest thing. So I'm going to put polyester t-shirt. I can turn mirror on or off. For this particular image, it doesn't really matter. So here's the product, polyester. There's some other options here as well. What size paper you have. I have letter. Oops, that's wrong. Polyester. High quality, True Picks Classic. So you can pick different types of paper. Tray 1, portrait. I'm going to leave it as a portrait. Now if I did landscape, maybe I could make it, no, I couldn't make it any taller. This is kind of an image that needs to be square. And then I hit print. It prepares my print and it sends it to the print. Once you've printed your image, you're going to have it on sublimation paper. Now, this image isn't necessarily going to look like this when you get done pressing it. And that is how you get your image to paper, is you use a heat press. I am going to be using this fabric that I got from Walmart. It is 65% polyester and 35% cotton. The more polyester that you have in what you're pressing on, the more vibrant your image will be. So here I have cut up my polyester into squares. They don't have to be perfect because this square is going to get trimmed around the edges. All right, so here's my image. Here is my substrate. And that is what you're going to adhere your sublimation ink to. And the way that this bonds on the fabric is the heat causes this ink to become a gas, and that gas adheres to your polyester. So here is my handy dandy heat press. I am going to actually rip the paper because my piece of fabric is not that big. It is very important that you protect your heat press when you're doing sublimation. When you're pressing vinyl, not a big deal. Your color more than likely isn't going to come off on your platen or your bottom layer or bottom shelf of your heat press. With sublimation, that is not necessarily true. So I use butcher paper for the bottom. Then I lay my substrate on top of that. And your substrate is whatever it is you're pressing. You can press more than just fabric when using sublimation prints. Then I will take my paper and I will lay that face side down on top of the fabric. And on top of that is where my butcher paper goes, because there have been times that I've actually seen the print from the paper that has the sublimation ink on it on the butcher paper that I laid on top. So I'm always glad when I remember to do this. And then I press it at about 400 degrees for 45 seconds. If sublimation isn't for you, then stick around, because I'm going to show you how you can use your fabric stash to do the same technique. So that is what the sublimation ink looks like on my fabric. Pretty cool. So let me show you what I'm going to do with it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put these sublimation prints, after I trim around them, on different squares. And I'm going to raw edge applique them. If you don't have a sublimation printer, not a big deal. We can do the same thing with scraps out of your fabric stash. Let me show you how. Now, the first thing that I'm going to show you probably won't surprise you coming from me. Yes, a panel. I have had this panel for a while, and it is a 3 wishes panel. Love 3 wishes, and it has wine sayings on it. And I thought this would be the perfect complement to my flowers. So what I did, I took a pair of scissors, I took one of the panel pieces, only I must have been drinking because now it's right side up, and I cut it out. And right here is where I have it. Wine makes me awesome. So it doesn't have to be any cool sublimation printing where you press it on fabric. Everything that you need to dress up your 10-inch blocks is probably right there in your sewing room. So there are all kinds of panels. This is just the one that I happened to pick out. And this is probably close to a 10-inch panel itself, but that's okay because I'm just going to cut around my image. Here, I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm not fussy cutting. You can if you want to. I am just cutting out what I want of this panel image, and then I'm going to put it on my 10-inch square because I don't want something to take up my whole 10-inch square. If I did that, then I wouldn't even use the 10-inch square layer cake that I had. So here, just that quick, I've cut out what I want to be on there, and I'm kind of doing an every other block. I don't want to necessarily cover up all my blocks. You could if you want to. Again, this is totally up to you, totally the way you want to do it. Now, another thing that you can do. Are you ready? If you are not a panel buff or fanatic like I am, then just go to your stash. I don't understand if you tell me you don't have a stash. Go to your friend's stash. Somebody you know surely has a stash, and pull out fabric that you think would look good on your 10-inch squares. You just cut around and put on your block and it would look great. Now, the one that I found that is my favorite is this border. And then I also liked this one because, again, you could cut around a couple of the flowers, put them on your blocks, and they would look awesome. This border, I didn't have anything particular in mind for it. So what I can do is I can cut out a grouping of these flowers and it will look awesome. Now, let's see. I don't want to use all of my fabric or all of this border for that. And actually, I could probably cut here. Let's do that first. I just came up with this. I could cut, I think that might be too big. Actually, I'm going to cut on the inside of the strip on both sides. This is one thing I cannot do with both my hands. When I cut, I have to cut with my right hand. And I'm left-handed. I am just a mess. Okay, so now I don't want to cut that big pretty flower. Okay, so I can take this and put it on my block. Let's see how it's going to look. Okay. Oh, I still haven't cut these down, so I will need to cut this down and that down. And I may cut this one a little smaller, but I have everything is fine as long as there's wine, and then wine makes me awesome, and then I'm not a wine-o, I'm a wine-yes. And then multiple flowers. Now, you could put some batting behind some of this and make it puff up. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to have to worry about where exactly I am going to do the long arm quilting, so I'm not going to do that this time, but you could if you wanted to. I am going to stitch down all of these pieces so that the edges are exposed, and when it gets washed, they'll become frayed. Don't know why I love that stuff, I just do. So let me show you how I am going to stitch these down, and then it will be a matter of putting my 10-inch blocks together, and I will have a quilt top. Let's do this. And there is my block. I am not going to worry about the fact that all of this is loose, because when I put it together and long arm it or quilt it, this will be covered in quilting stitches. I did decide to try puffing up my image with some batting, because you'll never know if you don't try. So I am going to lay this here and grab a pair of scissors, and I want to go a little inside the lines. We'll see if that happens. Because of course I'm not going to be sewing at the edge. Alright, so I've got that. Scoot this over a little. Around this. Follow where it's going. And I'm not worried about catching it in the seam, because before I wash this, I will quilt it. And the quilting should take care of holding this down. All right, so I'm gonna put this here. There is my block with a little bit of elevation, so it's kind of puffy. My quilt top is complete. So I'm going to call it a sampler. We have a sample of sublimation. We have a sample of using a panel. We have a sample of just using fabric and part of the design out of the fabric. Now this flower, I actually used my Cricut to cut out the petals of the top and the bottom, and then this was sublimated, and then I just stitched this on. If you are interested in seeing how I use my cutting machines to cut fabric, let me know in the comments below. So I achieved my goal. I didn't want to cover up all of the 10-inch squares. I just wanted to cover up some of them. So I started out with 10-inch squares that I had left over from something, and went to my sublimation printer, printed some images on some fabric and just stitched them onto the different blocks of my quilt. We'll see how it washes up. I'm not absolutely sure I love it yet. I did do something different on some of the blocks. So here, I didn't put any batting in. But on this block, I did. And on this block, and this block. So I want to see if that batting kind of poofs things up after I wash it. One other thing that I want to do before I say this quilt is done. Right here, my intention was not to catch this edge in the seam. I actually wanted it to kind of overlap onto another block because I thought that would just look kind of cool. So what I am going to do is I'm going to rip out that little bit of stitching, pull this piece out so that it comes over on the top. It won't take long, and I think I'm really gonna like the outcome. So here you can see how that piece of that applique, or whatever we're gonna call it, is going over to the other square. I kind of wish that I had done that on some of the other pieces of this quilt, but you know, this was my first sampler quilt, so I have all kinds of ideas now. So here you can see some sublimation. This is from a wine panel. This is more sublimation. I think this is my favorite. I love this fabric. So now I'm going to put a backing on it, wash it, and see what it does. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Eat some chocolate and be kind to everybody. Until next time, bye. What's the word? Wow, I can't even talk. That ink adheres to whatever it is you're pressing where you don't want to see it.